Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Heather Bhandari from the Visual Arts Department, and I first want to thank a few people for making this happen. Thank you to Olanda Estrada, can't see with the lights, but she's up there, Christine Newson, and Leslie Bostrom, the chair of the Visual Arts Department. Also, a big thanks to Brown Arts Initiative for helping to make this happen and bring our guests here today. I am thrilled to be introducing Shaun Leonardo and Christina Yang. For many years, I've been a great admirer of Shaun Leonardo. He might be learning about this for the first time right now, both at his work and him as a person. He's known as an exceptional artist, a social activist, and an extraordinary educator. According to Meredith Mendelsohn of the New York Times, Shaun is a growing force in the field of social practice. To me, he's a powerful disruptor and change agent. Christina Yang is the program director of the Guggenheim, who understood Shaun's work so well that she facilitated its presence and realization in the massive rotunda at the museum, where it not only held the space, but it imbued the institution with risk-taking, vulnerability, and strength in a way that transformed our conception of what kinds of conversations could happen within the often conventional walls of a museum. Shaun is a Brooklyn, New York-based artist, originally from Queens. He received his MFA from the San Francisco Art Institute and is a recent Macmillan Artist in Residence. He's received support from Creative Capital and the Guggenheim Social Practice Initiative. He's dedicated to community-engaged practice, where he co-founded Assembly, an arts program offering an alternative to incarceration to court-involved youth, and has brought works such as the participatory performance I Can't Breathe from 2016 to schools and community centers. His work's been presented in galleries and institutions nationally and internationally, most recently at the Guggenheim, the Highline, Recess, and Volta, New York. Christina Yang is the Director of Public Programs at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. She's overseen over 1,000, it's a lot, public programs, exhibitions, performances, and artist projects, including Primitive Games by Shaun in June of this year. Also, The Francis Effect by Tanya Bruguera in 2014, Choreographies of Power with Public Movement in 2015, Carrie Mae Weems' Live, Past Tense, Future Perfect in 2014, The Conceptual Studio by Karen Finley, Mirror Piece Revisited 2010, and Lines in the Sand 2004, both by Joan Jonas, and Figures in a Field by Dean Moss and Layla Ali in 2003. Yang holds a BA from UC Berkeley, an MA from Williams, a Master in Philosophy from the CUNY Graduate Center. She's trained as an art historian and curator, and she is a PhD candidate in performance studies at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. She specializes in spectatorship, politics of the image, and contemporary art. She's the co-author of How to Make Art with Places, People, and Things for Guggenheim Social Practice. Please join me in welcoming Shaun Leonardo and Christina Yang.
Thank you, Heather, for that introduction, and thank you to the Brown Arts Initiative and Brown University for having Shaun and I here today. It's our collective joy to highlight our year together as co-creators of his project, Primitive Games. We're thrilled to share our knowledge across the interdisciplinary community at Brown in visual art, performance studies, theater, architecture, and the art of glass. I want to give a special recognition to my former Guggenheim colleague, Anne Bergeron, who is the deputy director here at the Brown Arts Initiative. Anne is a rare and dedicated cultural practitioner who sees the importance of bringing ideas and people together and has the knowledge and the wherewithal to realize that vision. So thank you to Anne, and you are all very lucky to have her. And in response to Anne's invitation, Shaun and I are excited to present a view of what it takes to sustain a social practice within the life of an artist and also within the confines of the museum. These are particularly divisive times in the United States, and Shaun is a unique artist working across many worlds, encompassing art, the visual arts, masculinity, performance, Black and brown identities, failure, and the law. Guggenheim Social Practice was born out of similar urgencies, and we are committed to creating to generating creativity and expression for new publics. Shaun and I met through our research into artists engaged in this genre, new hybrid genre of contemporary art, broadly termed social practice. It comes as an extension of public art making and also conjoined with community activism, criminal justice, documentary film, journalism, and education. Inasmuch as the Guggenheim is a highly visible platform, Guggenheim Social Practice, remains an experimental initiative wherein we've been very fortunate to experiment and test some ideas and incubate a social activation within a public arena. We're going to start tonight with Shaun presenting his project, Primitive Games. Then he and I will sit down and have a little conversation about the formulation of that project and how the Guggenheim came to be involved. And then we'd love to open it up to you for questions about, just really the highlights that we're presenting about this beautiful project and Shaun's work. And time permitting, we'll talk a little bit about what's coming up next. So I'm going to hand it off to Shaun, and that's it.
What I think we are currently seeing in political debate is that people come to the table with their defensive positions already formulated. When you get rid of that opportunity to start with words, you force people to only read one another's body language.
Towards the end, our poses were like this, like
we were communicating.
together.
What we're going to try to do is extract gestures that are absolutely and only yours.
When you've gone through some things, you learn how to move. There's just something that doesn't even need to be said.
What might happen when 4 seemingly divided groups are invited to one event to debate one another without using words? Our bodies tell maybe a fuller story. So the images you're about to see are the resulting event entitled Primitive Games that followed about 4 months of negotiation and workshops with these 4 distinct communities. Divided group affiliations surrounding a single issue, where we transformed the Guggenheim into a gladiatorial arena so that these 4 communities might debate one another without the use of words. The argument that I'm posing here is that what interrupts or completely defeats interconnectivity is the fact that language oftentimes is the very thing that gets in the way. So what happens when you remove the possibility of an individual or a group to fall back on default language that they've developed in their defensive postures? The 4 groups that we worked with were the NYPD, military veterans, a group that I coined recreational users of firearms, and finally, citizens impacted by street violence. I should say or clarify that at no point during the workshop process did any group know the identity of the other groups, their competitors. Nor did they discover the central issue at debate until the moment of contest. Because it was important to me that in this workshop process, that they could not perceive who was on the other side of that argument until they were faced with that person. And that they could not identify what was at the center of that argument until they were faced with that person. Because what we're seeing now as the failure of communication, particularly in political debate, is that so often a side or an affiliation will develop their speaking points, their defensive positionality based on who they perceive to be on the other side of that argument. So no middle ground is even possible. Communication has failed before it's even been initiated. And we see this everywhere. You probably see it on this campus. There is no middle ground. There is no way in which using language we're able to connect because we've already decided that we're right. We've already decided that the debate will be a strategy of proving oneself correct. During the workshop process, what I attempted to guide each of the groups separately was in a process of dialing into some very difficult territory. Their own experience of conflict, so that they might be more attuned to the ways in which their bodies already activated when faced with confrontation. Now, if you can imagine, for these groups, there's an embedded choreography that is related to their professional lives. If you think about confrontation for an NYPD officer, there's a way in which they know how to engage. Similarly to someone that has had the experience of moving in the streets, of protecting oneself in that type of environment, there is a choreography to that that might not be conscious. That is very different than an individual that experiences or feels they have the entitlement to hold the power of a gun. And similarly, when you think about confrontation or the possibility of conflict for a military veteran, that activates in the body in a very specific way. Just think about the ways in which these four groups hold a weapon. An officer versus someone in the streets versus a gun range or a hunter versus someone that's in the military. That is orchestrated through the body in a very specific way. And yet when you dial into a real sense of conflict and move away from just your professional lives to how you've experienced confrontation, resistance, opposition on a personal level, something happens in the body that may have nothing to do with that group affiliation. And you move into a space where ideas of conflict actually start to connect to your experience of tragedy, of sadness. And that, as you read through body language, is universal. And it's in that body language that maybe a little more truth is conveyed. And so it was having these individuals get more attuned to the possibilities of what a body can say and the meanings embedded in a body, and to have them more carefully understand how their body articulates these things so that by the time they got to this event, they could more carefully read someone that was in front of them. So that meaning would be translated on a different level that wouldn't be this language that we attempt to share, that doesn't do the job. There's another aspect of this that's incredibly important, and it was in the initiation of the performance, the opening ceremony, if you will, in which these four groups were divided into two teams, but not along clean group affiliations, not along those lines, but something much more elusive. And rather than tell you about it, I thought we would do it ourselves. So I'm going to invite everyone, even you, Mr. Cameraman, to stand up, if you will. And this is what I'd like to attempt. And this is the same process in which these 4 groups were divided into 2 teams. I'm going to recite a series of questions. And what I'd like you to do is answer silently, individually, but not with words. What I'd like you to do is, if you answer yes, and don't worry, I will repeat this before every question. If you answer yes, just do a slight quarter turn to your right. If you answer no, you're going to do a slight quarter turn to your left. Now you're not going to reset. So if you continue to answer yes, you will continue to rotate a quarter turn with each answer. If you find yourself saying right, yes, left, no, you will respond accordingly. Does that make sense? So just keep responding right, yes, left, no, however that may have you turn. Right, yes, left, no. Do you consider yourself a good person? Some hesitations. But you need to answer. Right, yes, left, no. Do you have power? Right, yes, left, no. Do you love your home? Right, yes, left, no. Do you fear for the safety of your community? Right, yes, left, no. Do you own a firearm? Right, yes, left, no. Do you feel nervous about the future? Right, yes, left, no. Do you believe in the right to keep and bear arms? Right, yes, left, no. Do you believe you will be alive in 10 years? Right, yes, left, no. Do you feel American? Right, yes, left, no. Have you ever fired a weapon? Right, yes, left, no. Have you ever held a bullet? Right, yes, left, no. Have you ever lost a loved one to gun violence? And finally, right, yes, left, no. Have you ever witnessed someone die? Without changing your position, look around the room. During primitive games, that second to last question was the first and only time that the issue of gun violence was named in the room. For these group affiliations that were, for the first time, announced in the space. and was maybe most surprising of the performance project to everyone in the room is that we found members of each group on both lines. Look around the room and see who you are in alignment with and who you are maybe in opposition. It's not as clean as you might have thought. When do we allow our group affiliations to dissolve to allow a different type of identity to take priority? When is it that we allow these affiliations, affinities, beliefs to move aside so that we seek the humanity in each other on individual terms? Thank you. Am I supposed to be here?
Yes. Doesn't want it. Let's see. Hard to talk after that. Let's settle in here. I just want to check. Do I have the time somewhere? I want to make sure we don't go over. It's not on. Yeah. So someone will have to just let me know if we start getting too close to ending time. Is that okay? All right. So Shaun and I actually have a little choreography of our own that we sort of planned, but I'm actually going to ask him a surprise question just to kind of get us going a little bit.
All right.
So up until about a week ago, Shaun, I remember having a conversation with you, and you had not yet watched the entire documentation of the performance. And you don't have to tell us now whether you've actually watched it or not, but what I'm really interested in maybe having the audience hear a little bit about is, I also remember there was a time when we were planning the project when you know, and the whole time it was, Shaun had a lot of it figured out, like the costumes and the scenography, you know, who was going to be in the piece. But what he hadn't decided yet was whether he was going to be in the piece or whether he was going to direct the work. And I would love to, having us just sort of like re-perform the piece, I would love to hear from you. Have you had and so also after the work, Shaun went to Santa Fe on a month-long residency, and it really had some time to sort of think about the sort of 6 months that went into the preparation of the work. But I would love to hear, what was it like for you to be in the work, you know, after having spent all this time designing it, and, you know, because, yeah.
Those are, they're related questions because I still have not watched the performance. And I think I'm still grappling with my own experience of being in the performance, that I'm not quite ready objectively and by myself to witness the performance as a participant, or excuse me, as a viewer, as opposed to a participant. So I did not know until very close to the performance that I needed to be in it. And the reason was that I had realized that I was the only person in which all of these stories, and for those of you that experienced the workshop earlier today, it was a very similar pattern that I worked with these groups separately, in which they were telling stories and translating them into performative gestures without words. But I was maybe the only individual privy to all of these stories of conflict from all of these groups, from all 4 groups, and having them all pass through me as the only individual that was the container for all of this emotional, really upheaval. And the spectrum of incredibly proud but also tragic experience that were shared with me, I knew that having gained such proximity to these groups that I needed to see it through. And the only way that I felt that would be successful was by being in it. And really the decision came down to the fact that during the workshop process, I don't neatly define myself or identify with any of the groups.
Right.
And yet I have a relationship with all of them that brought them to this project, which is the way that I conduct my life. And through the process, I became so close to these individuals that my own belief system started to be questioned. And so the only way that I felt that I could sort of complete the process was to experience what that entanglement would be like.
Yeah, that's wonderful. For anyone who maybe wants a little bit more sense of what the performance was like, the Guggenheim just posted a shorter version, a 12-minute documentary that sort of takes everyone through the performance and actually it does have some interviews with the participants themselves, and I really encourage you to look at it because you get a sense. You get a sense of the project. You also get a sense of Shaun's presence in the work, and I think actually that I'm interested in that as I am in the entire piece because as a curator and as an art historian. My work is really directly with an artist and sort of like understanding their vision and understanding what their contribution in the world is. And my sense is, speaking here as part of the Arts Initiative, we're talking to people within the arts community, but that also are looking to do, make other kinds of impact. So I'm very interested in that sort of embodiment that Shaun brings to the work and to the world, I guess, are the two things I'm, interested in just seeing how that happens. So maybe we could go back a little bit in time and talk a little bit about again, I think I would love for this audience to hear sort of your trajectory, both to the piece and to where you are as an artist. I mean, I think it's super unusual for an artist to, come out of like a traditional painting drawing program and then become the sort of educator, performance director, activist that you are. So
I think we're back up, yeah?
Yeah, great. Oh.
That's a great image to start on.
That's a good one to start with.
I think I planned it that way. But I want to first address my work in terms of this idea of embodiment because that's typically what I address my work as. That is what I always return to. Yeah. Don't pay attention to this too much yet. As a matter of fact.
We'll get back to that.
Yeah. I'm consistently, particularly these days, trying to find approaches and strategies for moving individuals and communities closer together, whether it's through or for a particular issue or some level of trauma. I'm always, in terms of physical embodiment, attempting to locate what would otherwise exist as simply information somewhere else in the body, to have people get closer to a felt experience. And it's in that way that, and in that translation, that you hold on to something more firmly. And I can certainly talk about everything I'm going to show you in terms of that physical embodiment, which in the earliest parts of my performance practice really centered on my own role, embodying figures like El Conquistador, Mexican wrestling luchador who fought an invisible presence, the Invisible Man. And it was in that earlier practice really chasing that hero figure and the ideals and the constructions around that type of macho figure as a way to discover for myself and for the audience where I would fail.
I actually think that's really interesting, Shaun. I mean, another way that I think that we can frame the question is your return to your body, which is a brown body, a male body, but also a body of vulnerability and a body around uncertainty. And I think that's something that's really I mean, you know, can come out of a drawing practice, can come out of a practice of physicality. And so I think that's really important to keep in mind as we look at some of the early work and look at the newer work as well. Yeah.
I mean, and absolutely. And in that embodiment, if I really wanted to be honest with myself, and I was thinking about this presentation and this conversation and really trying to be truthful to myself about how this project, Primitive Games, relates to my lived experience, but also the trajectory of my work. And really the through line is violence. Oh. And in this earlier work, like El Conquistador, in chasing that ideal and the fulfillment of this figure, I caused bodily damage to myself, but also injury to my psyche in discovering what the shortcomings were in attempting to fulfill such a ridiculous construction of masculinity. And I think really if I map my process, it's been a trajectory of moving away from self. So in this piece where I should say, for the sake of my work, I've trained and become a Mexican wrestler, a boxer, a mixed martial artist, a bullfighter. So it was always important to me that in this embodiment that I was critiquing from the inside out. So in this case, work as a boxer, an amateur boxer, and then moving out and incorporating other players, literally and metaphorically, in these macho rituals of violence, to understand how it is that we enact violence upon each other as men, as rites of passage. So that being Bull in the Ring, which enacted a actual drill ritual that was banned for its violence. And this being Battle Royal, where I invited 19 other professional wrestlers in an unscripted event to wrestle to the finish while blindfolded. And then again, as you can kind of see, like moving, incorporating other people to enact the work. And I think when I really came down to it, it started to be about, in terms of social issues, the violence that we enact upon each other from community to community. So not just within these entities or group affiliations, or whether it be a football team or this theater of wrestling, but the violence enacted by state-sanctioned power on bodies of color. This piece being the eulogy, which took the form of a funeral procession, where I modified and recited the eulogy, the speech at the heart of the book, Ralph Ellison's The Invisible Man, which, as you can see, has been a through line through my entire practice, this idea of invisibility, and created an event where we could collectively mourn men of color that have been killed by the police. And I wanted to introduce this because you did suggest, Christina, but a large part of my practice is drawing. And the easy way to talk about this is that it provides a sort of balance, a solitude in the studio that is a different type of strategy making, a different level of thinking, and satisfies a different part of my practice and psyche that the cathartic expression of performance does not. And it's almost necessary to have both, and they feed into each other in ways that I'm not totally even conscious of. But I bring this up specifically because this was one of the earliest drawings in this series where I was quite literally attempting to find space within the image of Eric Garner's death, to sit with the trauma and slow both myself down and the viewer down so we can just continue to look. And I think when I think about my practice, I'm always, it's very similar to this ways. It's like I want people to slow down and sit there and be in it. And this around the same time, and I can't quite remember which came first, but around the same time, I developed the I Can Breathe performance, which was framed as a self-defense class, where I imparted real self-defense techniques and maneuvers, and over the course of about 40 minutes, not only does it take a more performative turn, but it also starts to carry the weight of police violence as I address what they're learning in terms of actual events, culminating in the chokehold that took the life of Eric Garner. The lose-lose being that for certain bodies, self-defense actually leads to more harm. And what I always used to say during this performance was that, one, it would have been impossible for Eric Garner to defend the maneuver that the NYPD refuses to call a chokehold. But also the fact that to truly defend oneself from that maneuver, a maneuver that is banned by the force but not illegal, one would have to go on the offense. But to go on the offense nearly guarantees that you're bringing on serious harm, if not death. And I think if the projection of what I've been after has been thinking about violence from internal to external and moving further and further out, while always keeping in mind what are my own concerns and how do I fit in the world, you know?
I think that leads really nicely to the second question I want to ask before I open it up to the audience, who I get the feeling I was like burning with questions already. So this question is it will lead back to sort of the next phase of Shaun's work, but it also looks at sort of again looks at excuse me, the way in which you lead your life. Yeah. So one of the other fascinating things that we discovered about Shaun when we were getting to know each other is the multiple worlds that he lives within. We were super interested in his work as an educator and as an administrator at the new museum. Also, his work with the Assembly Project that I'm hoping that he'll talk a little bit about, and then his practice as a visual artist, and his other work as a performance in performance. So, Shaun, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the sort of like the different, and you alluded to it as well as you were working and doing in the workshops that you were, having on any given day you would have 5 different conversations with a military veteran, with a recreational gun user, some who are in your family, some who you just met. And every time you had the conversation, you would agree with all of them, And so that, yeah. I think for young, practitioners who are at an interdisciplinary program, that's really important to hear how you can sort of balance that and how you can live that, because that's sort of the way in which, things are going to happen, things are going to get done.
Absolutely, and as uncomfortable as it might be, it's the position that I find myself as negotiator above all.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And in terms of naming, what I would really want to share with you is that I will call myself whatever gets me in the room. So whether that be artist, activist, educator, organizer, whatever it is that you need to hear is what I will call myself in order to allow for that negotiation. And I think it's really telling that in a rather quick process, based on my personal and professional lives, I was able to organize these incredibly disparate groups. And on an ongoing basis, I would have these conversations and find myself thinking, how the fuck did how am I going literally from a precinct to a space with formerly incarcerated individuals. And then veterans somewhere in between, maybe.
Yeah.
And the sort of psychological shift that is required, and the code switching in language that is required, not only to sell the work, but the continuous negotiation and having them commit to a practice.
Right.
Not an outcome. And that's something I said to you all at the workshop, right? To commit to a process, to believe that whatever's going to happen at the end is going to be real and necessary. And so I guess, yes, the one thing I do want to share, and it's become the kind of the merge of all of these roles, is in the ongoing practice and art project that is called Assembly, in which I utilize a workshop process very similar to the ones that I utilized with students earlier today, in what is framed as a diversion program, which essentially means that in an arrangement with the downtown criminal court in Brooklyn, young people aged 16 to 24 who have been arrested join me for a 4-week, once-a-week workshop process based on storytelling and performance, rather than have their case pursued in court. After which, if completed successfully, their cases can be closed and the record sealed, avoiding an adult record. Now, what you're seeing is not that, because it's conducted completely as a closed session, keeping all of their identities anonymous. But what's unique about the space that we conduct, and I should say that it's hosted by the organization Recess and founded by myself and Allison Weisberg, the executive director of Recess, is that we allow for space outside of the court mandate for individuals to be paid to pursue their creative talents. And in each case, with every cohort, we have individuals come back and stay with us and to exist in the space, first off. And secondly, because they know that their talents and their creative energies are being validated, maybe for the first time in their lives. And so what you're seeing is actually programming that was conducted by myself and youth that stayed on, in which they placed individuals within their own memories of being arrested and incarcerated.
You know, Shaun, I think that's really interesting, actually, that not only do you inhabit different worlds, but you're actually modeling that for your co-collaborators, you know, that they can now actually come to what is in theory a way for them to avoid imprisonment, but they actually are now enacting another body and another role, and they're being hired to work as artists or hired to work as educators, and I think that's an amazing flip in which to activate that what looks like one thing on the surface is actually something else underneath. And what you said earlier about moving between these worlds, you know, as far as advice to young artists, that you do what you have to do, I think to feel that this is about the survival of your work, and it's about the survival of, you know, certain kinds of issues. And that's really important to have a clarity about when you're trying to get your first show, trying to get a group together, trying to get an issue, move that ahead. So to like feel that this is like urgent, and that it's, if I'm going to have to make it happen, it's going to be whatever it has to be.
Absolutely. So. And what I would say is that the reason that I keep returning to artist as a title, it is that it's the very thing, the only thing maybe that is not fixed. And in negotiating or having continuing relationship with these groups that would like to sort of define what I do, they're incapable of doing so. And so it's the very thing that gives me the leverage, that gives me the power to conduct what I need to do and what I want to do. Because at the end of the day, I always start with what I care about. So while this could be labeled an activist project, an education project, in its totality, it continues to evolve, it continues to move. And in that's the art of it. And so because it's not fixed, I think it has power. Because as soon as it becomes something enabled for or by the court, or for a specific purpose in mind, or with a specific outcome in mind, it loses its power. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's really beautiful. I think I'd maybe like to invite questions from the audience. This is a nice, let me see, do we have...
I think we're good.
And do people stand up, or do people need a microphone, or how do you? Okay, maybe stand up so we could see you. Anyone? Yeah. Oh yeah, please. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask if there was any what was the experience following the reform period, and performance, and if there was any interaction with the 4 different groups after that experience was shared.
Yes, there was, and you know, it was prompted by other individuals, not myself. Actually, where there were other collaborators, including Christina and a number of the participants that asked to reconvene. And so about a month and a half following the project, we all did, members of each group did get in for the first time in the room together. And it was also for the first time that they actually introduced and met one another by name. And what was really amazing is that even for all those days following the piece, there were participants, performers that were unsure who was who. And I should also clarify that while the group affiliations were announced in the space, at no point was any individual explicitly labeled one thing or another, because it was important to me that that continued to be a question not only for the participants in the way that they perceived and engaged one another, but that the audience continued to question themselves and their perceptions of who was who. And in my follow-up conversation with the audience members, it was incredible how sure they were about labeling individuals and how wrong they were.
So in another answer to that, this is going to be like the administrative answer to that. The day after the performance, we did have a symposium as well. No, but you're right. That the entire group of performers did not come together until after Shaun came back from his residency, but we were able to organize kind of like an academic program where Shaun had identified 4 individuals, one from each group, to speak with him about their experience of the performance. When they came, though, we did not give their names in the program. They didn't actually say what their affiliation was. Right. And so the audience, their anonymity was very important to Shaun to sort of keep. And I think at some point they felt like it was important for the sake of the public's experience to sort of be in that space of not knowing, is she a policewoman? Is she a gun user? What is her place? And so, we do have that video on the Guggenheim's website as well, which features a conversation with the participants and Shaun, and a couple of other short artist talks, and a keynote lecture by Lisa Dent, who gave a really beautiful talk also about power in the institution. Shaun's allusion to who brought everyone together has to do with. The Guggenheim was very fortunate that both with our first 2 projects in Guggenheim Social Practice and with Shaun's project, we were able to hire an evaluator to work with us who was with us the whole time. And our evaluator and our media, we had a documentary producer who was almost like Shaun's shadow, throughout the whole process. And she insisted that we bring everyone together for her sake, but she needed to talk to everybody, and she felt it was very important that they have a chance to actually reflect upon the process, and they had to sort of come together sort of as co-creators and to sort of reveal and to actually experience it all together. So I think she felt very strongly that there was a place for language in this this post-performance, I guess post-activity.
Absolutely.
So, thank you for the question. Yeah, in the back. Oh, you're leaving? Are you?
No. Okay. Get in the light. Thank you.
Yeah, get into the light. Yeah, perfect.
All right. So one of the things that I really love about your work and process is everything feels like it's a negotiation in some way. You really negotiate with, your viewers, your audience, and people who are participating. And, I'm another artist activist, and in this industry, and I noticed that activism don't pay. But somehow it seems that you keep coming up with these win-win negotiations in these situations. Is it really what it seems, or do you just have the key? And if you have the key, can you give it to us to create insight?
I need to answer this 2 different ways, and I can refer to the project specifically, Primitive Games, in that as an artist, with the support of an institution like the Guggenheim, one thing strategically that I leverage is the institution. So I, as an individual, while I have personal relationships in each one of those groups, can you imagine me going to the NYPD and saying, I got this idea? Having the weight, literally, of the name, but the scale is the thing that sways the participation, right? And so it's in, and I say this in terms of like how we start to understand social practice, the relationship with the institution becomes a part of the nature of the work. And in terms of negotiation, that becomes a whole negotiation in of itself. How to operate, how to function with a machine to get the work done. But that can be leveraged rather than a compromise. And I think it's in the machinery and the rhythm of working with an institution that actually you can get quite a bit done, more so than I as an individual can set out to accomplish. Now, in terms of like this, whether I have the key or not, in any social practice project, there need to be stakes. And this is where I think an understanding of activism comes in. Because art so often is packaged neatly. And certainly as documentation, that might be what you're witnessing. But those stakes have to be personal, and they have to be, there has to be something that you're willing to risk. And in each instance, there's something that I fail in. And in each instance, there's something that I'm not satisfied with. And it's in the negotiation, it's in the outcome, it's in the product, so to speak, it's in the aesthetics, it's in the possibilities of change. And that is where a social practice piece functions best, is in pointing out the failures. And that is what I think distinguishes this type of practice from other neatly packaged art.
I'm going to also give you another kind of quasi-answer to your question. So not only as part of social practice, but as part of being a performance curator, it's very important to me that everyone's labor is recognized. And so just, for your information, all the participants were compensated for the workshop, for their performance, for their public speaking. And that was part of, we were very clear with Shaun about that from the beginning when he said, I'd like to work with these 4 groups, and we had to sort of work out the budget and everything. I think it's important to recognize that labor, to recognize your work as an activist and say, if I'm going to commit my life to it, I need to be able to support myself. And so I think you only want to work with an organization or within an organization that is going to give you, your livelihood. So, and that's something that I think the Guggenheim and Guggenheim Social Practice has always been very committed to, is that we didn't send Shaun to, to the police station with another curator to just say, hey, you want to come do this with us in your off hours on the weekends. We actually came to them and said, in what way, as part of your job, can you do this? In what way, do you need to be do you find the freedom to be able to do this 10 hours the whole, 3 months or something? And so I think it's very important to sort of build that into the conversation around whether it's your art, whether it's your activist work, whether it's your studies, that, that your security has to be taken care of. So that's my answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I guess also then to put it out there that administrators are activists in other way. And so, even if I'm not the one coming up with the concept, or, someone like what Anne does, bringing people together, I think we're all part of this project where we are all going to be able to work together and realize these kinds of works. So I think that you can bring that sort of, those politics and those ethics to whatever work you're doing. It never needs to be passive. It never needs to be, you don't need to be on the other side of power. You can actually just try to just do better work. or do the best work. Do the right work. Any, yeah, oh, okay.
Oh.
We have three, but I think
We'll go
eye
three in
contact
a
in the
row,
front
yeah.
first. Yeah, we'll do 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so why don't you go ahead first? If we have, oh. I think we're going to take this one in the front first, yeah.
I was wondering if in your research for your projects, if you were talking to like psychologists and therapists about like trauma in the body and somatic experiencing, and if that was part of what you're looking at.
Beyond what I'm looking at, I try to have a clear, or it's impossible to be entirely clear, but I try to have an understanding of how the work touches upon these other fields. And so in the development of something specifically like assembly, we're speaking with sociologists, clinical psychologists, psychiatrists, but I also want to clearly state that I do not enact this work as an arts therapist. That is not my practice, and I do not try to assume that role. And so in this research or in these conversations, it's as much knowing where the work, how it's maneuvering, the impact that it's having, so it can be done carefully. But it's also knowing exactly how I might stay in my lane and provide something that is not being done in those realms.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. Did you have a question? Yep, go ahead.
Yes, please. Okay, so I was wondering how deeply you go into the psychological involvement of violence and the male carriage of violence and this sort of thing. But, so what is it that you are presenting and working with in your body? Like, what framework are you actually feeling, I guess, or experiencing when you're doing this?
Could you be more specific as to which projects?
This one's question applies to how deeply you go into the psychology or the sociology. So I'm wondering, when you're actually experiencing the process, where are you holding it in your body? Like, what does it feel like?
It's different now than it was before in the earlier practice, where I'm actually embodying these personas, these characters that violence is inherent to. And it's really in that I'm now occupying more of a role of an instructor. And so if there's any, the embodiment is more so in the delivery. And I think that the workshop process is maybe more sensitive than what can be conveyed in that minute teaser, which is really focused on the workshop process. However, to answer your question, in regards to the earlier practice, where it was whether with football or wrestling, I was attempting to fulfill that role in by best I mean in its completeness. And it was in being sincere to that I could really depict and sense its failures and the way in which this construct of masculinity sets individuals up, men, sets us up for failure. And so in doing the work, or I should say, the closer I got to the performance, the more I was that thing that I was incredibly uncomfortable with. And I think the power in this sort of in performance practice, but certainly even in the work now, is in that there's an inherent contradiction to the work and its fulfillment. That these are both things that I admire and detest. And that violence, particularly in an American context, is so ingrained in the way that we're asked to act and in our way of being, that to always keep it at a distance would not be honest, right? So it was incredibly damaging. It was incredibly hurtful. It was incredible. And, you know, the physical aspect of it was like paled in comparison to the ways in which my self-perception was continuously questioned. Because I became part of these worlds.
Yeah. So the individuals, I say in the NYPD, do certain individuals actually learn to identify their sort of inner body rather inside of this shell that they carry inside of this persona?
I'll share with you an anecdote because, you know, it's hard to address each individual or the impact or affect on each individual. Of course, my hope is to have some level of rupture. I wouldn't do the work otherwise. But one detective on the force for nearly 30 years in this follow-up conversation said in front of everyone, those that, and particularly in front of those that have been incarcerated, that he felt the process returned the possibility of reading body language more carefully. Now, to hear that from a detective and the way he articulated having been desensitized after so many years and returning to a place where he could sense both agitation in his own body, but in someone else, that's a win.
Maybe, I mean, I'm actually thinking maybe we should go to another question, you know? The workshops? Yeah, they're about
the
2
process?
hours. Yeah.
Or an individual workshop is 2 to 2.5 hours.
Yeah, I hope some of you maybe get a chance to actually participate in a workshop because you really get a chance to see Shaun kind of run you through the flow of an experience. And I mean, in the conversations that we've had, you know, I've noticed that there is a distillation of the work of Augusto Boal in Theater of the Oppressed, and you know other kinds of you know,
somatics was mentioned,
right? Yeah, performance,
tools.
yeah, tools,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and you know, trauma therapy. So, but again, as Shaun said, it's really abstracted through his work and these characters and these scenarios that he's creating. So it's very much, you know, within his own artistic concept. He's not, a so-called doctor or scientist in that respect, but it's really through his own imagination and his own kind of scripting that these strategies are applied. I think Anne and Heather both had a question, maybe, or Anne, go ahead.
So I love what you said about, you know, you have to commit to a process as opposed to committing to an outcome. But I'm wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about some outcomes that you at least witnessed
from this particular project. Well, the one thing that I keep revisiting that has been the most difficult thing to process has to do with the way these individuals, the participants, articulated their experience, both in the symposium and the convening afterwards, in which they said that once they heard who else was in the room, but also once they felt the weight of those questions, which divided them into 2 different sides, once the gravity of the situation was felt, that they found themselves wanting to seek each other out on an individual basis, that there was a need and desire to connect with each other's humanity. And I think that there are a number of factors that led to that. One, the sort of massive scale of being in that arena and having all those eyes bear down on you and the pressure of that level of performance. And all of these
noise,
elements at play, the removal of your identity with the blank outfits, but also in seeing that someone you identified with for over 4 months in this cohesive group all of a sudden is standing opposite you, that you did not answer those questions in the same way. And also to have to publicly, silently say, yes, I've witnessed someone die. Like the realness of that, of addressing that question, may be a question that you may never have asked yourself so plainly. that sort of grounds you in a situation where, affiliation ceases to be that important. And that you're left with this person that you're grappling with. And that those questions of those questions of how you're perceiving this person in front of you continues to play out. I know it certainly did for me, but I was the only one privy to like who's who. And so I'll share another anecdote I think that is really important to share in terms of this question, is that we had one individual that had been incarcerated for a long time. And when he heard that there were officers in the room, he made a specific decision to seek those individuals out. And he wanted to have them reckon with his presence. And what that translated into was like, see me, feel me. And he even said in the convening, it's like, I know that in the streets, if I touch a cop, that is grounds for arrest. So I wanted to touch everyone I perceived to be a cop. But all of this starts to play out not only in the mechanics of the gestures, but in the ways in which you really want to start to grapple with someone, because that opportunity is never provided.
If we're doing okay on time, I think we'll take one more question, and then I have. Okay.
One more?
Heather, do you want? Oh, okay. Okay. Well, go ahead.
So you've talked a lot about how your early work, where you were performing this masculinity and this violence, was much more like emotionally and probably, in terms of identity, very difficult to manage. And then in terms of like the whiplash between these different groups that you were working with in the workshops, like how do you manage like all the contradictions and likely emotional labor that's going on, and has that changed between your early work and what you're doing now?
I think the strategies for recuperation are really similar, in that I try to spend some time alone and have these voices kind of move away. And in terms of the earlier work, it would be just extracting myself from these arenas, these worlds that I have been participating in. In some respects, in the current practice, I'm both at an advantage and a disadvantage. And I think this is actually a really good point to end on. In coming closer and closer to these groups, and as I mentioned, having my own belief systems kind of rattled and sort of my own philosophies destabilized, that when you start questioning your own worldview, gets really uncomfortable. And I mentioned this to Christina before. There were times that after the workshops, I wouldn't go home. I'd just stand on a corner for a while because I didn't want to bring that home. Mm-hmm. And so having this all pass through, and in the emotional roller coaster that some of the narratives and the performance of the narratives in the workshop mode, but even at the performance, what that would entail would question my understanding of how I navigate the world. And I should say that while my work is of this type of negotiation, like my personal politics are much more radical than the ways that I move in the work. And it always, or it's consistently bothersome to me that I have found this role, or that I have found a place where I need to occupy a role where I'm sitting down with power so often on their terms. And that is the work that I find myself being effective in. And if that's the way that it gets something done, then that's what I got to do. But when I go home, I'm left with myself, right? The advantage is that I now have a family. I have 2 daughters and a wife. So I can stand in the corner, have all these questions of the ways I perceive myself and my own belief systems, but at the end of the day, I get to go home to something that's very real to me. And I think if I have that, it's going to be okay.
Thank you.